Thank you very much for everybody for joining us at BSI today. There are two of us on this webinar. My name is Charlotte Brodie. I'm the Construction and Personal Safety Value Propositions Manager here at BSI, and I'm joined by Nathan Shipley, our Certification Team Manager for PPE Certification. I will now pass over to Nathan and we will begin the webinar.
Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are in the world. The PPE Directive is changing into a PPE regulation. This is going to have some impact and implications onto the way that you as manufacturers and members of the PPE industry operate. My name is Nathan Shipley and I'm hoping to give you an overview as to what those changes are and how they're going to affect the way that you perform. The purpose of the webinar today and the agenda is that we're just going to give you a bit of an overview as to what the landscape is of the PPE Directive, take an understanding as to what the changes are as it transfers from being a directive into a regulation. We're going to look specifically into things such as the scope of the new regulation, how the regulation categorises PPE within it, the naming and renaming of modules within the PPE regulation, and also give you the latest timescales we know at the moment. We're also going to provide you with some tips and hints on how to prepare your business for the changes that are going to take place, and also give you an idea of some of the support that's available from BSI during that process. One thing I'd just like to say at this point is that the regulation hasn't come out as a formal text as yet. So some of the information that we're going to give at the moment is what we're expecting to happen. But once we do get firm confirmations, we'll be letting our customers and clients know once we know those for definite. Okay, the PPE Directive was one of the first new approach directives that was introduced by the European Union. It's quite an old directive, it's over 20 years old, and in that time technologies and methods of manufacturing and types of personal protective equipment have changed. So the PPE Directive is one of the new approach directives that's undergoing a rewrite and is being reissued as a regulation. The current overview of timescales is that throughout 2015 the development of the regulation will be in its final stages, and we'll get an indication as to what the wording is going to be in that document. That will leave us with a transition period between 2016 and 2018, and then throughout 2018 there will be a 12-month period of time when manufacturers are able to operate to both the old PPE Directive and the new PPE regulation. From 2019 onwards, the new PPE regulation will apply. So the question is, why a regulation? Well, a regulation is a binding legislative act across the European Union. It applies across Europe without any need for individual legislation to be required by each member state. Now, in the case of the PPE Directive and other European directives, once they were published by the European Union, they had to be adopted by each member state as national law. As this has been implemented as a regulation, once the regulation is issued by Europe, it means it will become mandatory across all the 28 European Union member states. There have been a few little changes in the approach as to who is incorporated within the PPE regulation. If we looked at the old PPE Directive 89/686/EEC, it was focused very much at manufacturers and their authorised representatives for prior to placing product onto the marketplace. Under the new PPE regulation, manufacturers and authorised representatives are still very much involved in the process of putting correctly certified product onto the market, but it's also affecting other aspects of the supply chain, and it's having an impact on people such as importers and distributors, where they will have a role to ensure that any PPE that they supply to end users is correctly CE marked and satisfies the essential health and safety requirements of the directive. There have been some movement in product categorisation. For example, in the old PPE Directive, products such as life jackets and hearing protection came under Category 2 or Intermediate Category PPE. And the way that this is looking to be translated into the new PPE regulations is that those two product types are going to become complex PPE or Category 3. We will go through the implications on these two specific products later on in this webinar, and then we should go into the product categorisation in greater detail in a later webinar. There are also some other products which are up for consideration under the PPE Directive. Some of these products are things such as domestic products, such as oven gloves, and also rubber domestic gloves that we use for chores around the house. Technology has moved on since the PPE Directive was introduced. So under the PPE regulations, it's also looking at products such as high pressure cutting equipment for concrete, and specifically referencing this as a Cat 3 PPE. Another thing as well that's being looked at within the PPE regulation is made to measure PPE. This, we're waiting for a proper definition as to what the definition of made to measure is, but we're looking along products such as custom made ear protection and also possibly prescription spectacles or things that are made off to a purposely fit type of personal protective equipment. As I say, the made to measure side is very much still in a state of flux, and we are waiting for some more robust definitions as to what made to measure PPE will actually mean. They are also looking at some changes within documentation within the Personal Protective Equipment Directive as it becomes a regulation. One of the things that is up for consideration is that a declaration of conformity must be issued with each type of personal protective equipment. Because with things such as hearing protection and small items like earplugs, one consideration for this is that rather than actual issuing a full declaration of conformity, a web link can be supplied on the user instructions, which will allow an end user to find that document on the internet rather than actually physically supplying it with the product. Another thing that's been talked about at the moment is introducing a mandatory 5-year certificate validity. This would then bring the PPE regulations very much in line with other types of European regulations that exist at the moment. European regulations such as the Medical Devices Directive and the Marine Equipment Directive all include 5-year validities within them. This has been enforced with a number of notified bodies up until this point. Admittedly, BSI doesn't maintain that stance, but it's looking to get actually read into the European regulation. Therefore, it's something that's going to have to get adopted across Europe. One thing about the PPE regulation is the scope of products that fall within it, and it is very much similar to the existing PPE directive as it stands at the moment. We'll be going through scopes on one of our later webinars, but it will include things such as eye and face protection, including simple category PPE such as sunglasses, intermediate safety goggles and welding protection. It's also going to include head protection, for example, industrial safety helmets and cycle helmets, and then also respiratory protection such as EN 149 disposable face masks, right through to firefighters' breathing apparatus. And it will also include sports equipment such as shin guards, canoeist helmets and equestrian body protectors. As with the current PPE directive, there are a number of products that are exempt from certification under the PPE regulation, and these again are very similar to the existing directive. So for example, PPE for use by the armed forces or in the use of law and order does not have to be CE marked under the PPE regulation. PPE intended for self-defence, for example, pepper sprays, those types of things, will not be included within its scope. PPE for private use against atmospheric conditions is not going to be included. One thing that is in a state of flux at the moment is PPE for atmospheric conditions that are used in professional environments. So for example, you have construction workers working on a highway. If they're supplied PPE to protect them from wind or rain, then that is one of the products which is looking to be included within the PPE regulations. Again, PPE that's being used on seagoing vessels and aircraft is not included within the scope of the PPE regulations. And the same for motorcycle helmets. Protective helmets and visors for motorcycles and mopeds are not included within the scope of the PPE regulations. The categorisation of PPE products is remaining similar as to the current directive, in that you have 3 different categorisations of product dependent on risk. The lowest risk will be category 1 or simple PPE. The category 2 will cover intermediate PPE, and category 3 will cover complex PPE. Now, as I said earlier on, we're running a series of webinars covering the transfer over to the PPE regulations, and the categorisation will be covered in more detail at a later webinar. But just to give you an insight as to what's going to be occurring, for simple PPE, it will still cover minimal risks. These will cover products that you're familiar with at the moment, such as sunglasses, swimming goggles, and this is where the domestic washing up gloves, rubber glove type products will also fall under. For the intermediate PPE, this is again going to have a similar sort of scope, very general, being those that do not fall within category 1 or 3, and this is going to cover the similar sort of products as with the current directive. So it's going to be things like safety goggles and spectacles, industrial safety helmets and bump caps, and cycle helmets. Complex PPE is also going to cover high-risk PPE as it does at the moment. This is going to be the type of PPE that prevents very serious consequences such as death or irreversible damage to health. Similar sort of products are going to be covered under the PPE regulation as with the current directive, and these are going to include similar existing products such as fall arrest and respiratory equipment, but it's also likely to include life jackets and hearing protection, which are currently being listed as category 2 PPE under the existing PPE directive. Now, as the directive changes from being the existing directive to the new regulations, one of the things that is going to change is the terminology used as part of the approval process. There's still effectively going to be 3 types of certifications that are going to affect people placing product onto the market, but the terminology is going to change, and we're just waiting for some final information to cover the actual mandatory requirements to fulfill those obligations. And again, once these are being confirmed and firmed up, we'll be passing those on either in the form of a white paper or in a webinar. But for the initial product approvals, you're all very familiar with the terminology of PPE Article 10 certificate or EC type examination certificate. These are going to change to the modular approach, which is common across many other directives, such as Lift Safety Directive, Marine Equipment Directive, and Pressure Equipment Directive. So it's using a common terminology across all European new approach directives. So rather than being called Article 10 or EC type examination certificates, they're now going to be known as Module B or EU type examination certificates. If you're making Category 3 type PPE, you'll have a number of different routes that you can certify through for ongoing surveillance. If you're currently going through the annual testing route through Article 11A, this will now be known as Module F. And if you're going down the Article 11B route through annual factory assessments, this will be known as Module D. So the processes are going to remain very, very similar. The difference is going to be that they're going to have more of a PAN approach, a new approach directive terminology, and cover it through that way. Okay, we've got some timescales. What this is going to cover is the timescales that we know at the moment. The current situation is that the European Council have read the draft proposed text within the regulation, and this is going up for a discussion sometime throughout the course of June 2015. At the end of this process, we should end up with some form of draft text in its pretty much final format, and that will give us a good indication as to what's going to be contained within the regulation and what the implications are going to be for both notified bodies and manufacturers, distributors and other people placing product onto the market. So sometime towards the end of summer 2015, early 2016, the PPE regulation will be published, and then we're looking for sometime towards the end of 2015, early 2016, for it to be published into the official journal. This will be the starting pistol for the true 2-year transition period to start. The actual regulation will come into force 20 days after being published into the European official journal, and this is some administrative requirement that all directives have to undergo through. Throughout the time in 2016, the PPE notified bodies that are currently approved to the PPE Directive will be starting their transfer to become notified bodies to the PPE regulation. Then around the end of 2017, the 2-year transition period ends. In 2018, what we have is a time frame when manufacturers can work to both directives. So throughout 2018, we're looking at manufacturers being able to work to the PPE Directive and also the new PPE regulations. And during the end of 2018, the PPE regulation will come in force and be the only mandatory requirement for supplying PPE onto the marketplace. We have had meetings with our competent authority in the UK, BIS, the Government Department BIS, and what they are informing us is that when the Commission approves all the notified bodies European-wide, it will all receive the same notification on the same day. So the idea is that no one country or no one notified body has an advantage in being able to supply EU type examination certificates or Module F or Module D certification. All the notified bodies will be working for the same sort of time frame. And then during this transition period, that will be when we're given the ability to make those transitions, to be deemed as competent to be able to make those. Okay, so there's a number of things that I know the timescales we've been talking about, sort of 2018 and 2019, they seem a long way away. But there are a number of things that we can be looking to be doing. I mean, if you go forward 3 years, it seems a long way, but it only seems like yesterday that the London Olympics was taking place. So it's not a long period of time at all in order to get ready for it. We have produced a number of documents and we're giving some certain number of guidance for people to get ready for this type of changeover from directive to regulation. And one thing that we have done is that we have published what's known as a white paper on the change to the PPE regulations, and this can be downloaded in PDF format from our dedicated website. This will give you information with regards to the timeframes that we know at the moment, the categorisation, and it gives a bit more detail with regards to scope and the classification of products. One thing that we do need to be looking at this present moment in time is whether the products that you're currently placing onto the marketplace meet the current specifications that are around. When the certificates need to be updated to the PPE regulations, one thing that we wouldn't be able to do as BSI is able to issue out new EU type examination certificates to withdrawn specifications. So if you currently have product range which have Article 10 certificates to withdrawn standards, then you need to start coming up with a plan of action as to what you intend to do with those products, and that's either replace them with new designs, come up and get them upgraded to the latest specifications, or decide to kill those products off. We can of course discuss these needs specifically, and there'll be an email address and phone number if you want to get in touch with somebody from BSI to get that process amended. This is going to be the first of 4 free webinars covering the changes in the PPE Directive to the PPE regulation. So ensure that you sign up for those so you can get information as to when the next webinars are going to be held, and we can give you some more information and some more accurate information as the European Union sort of passes that information out.
Okay, thank you very much, Nathan, for sharing the details with us all. This next slide just gives you a little bit of information around what we're trying to do, what we're planning to do to help clients really understand what is happening, and we have a series of webinars, as Nathan has mentioned. The next one will be looking at the categories, and then the third one in this series will be looking at the supply chain and what that means for manufacturers. The white paper is available now on our website, and we are going to be exhibiting at a series of events if you are planning to travel to these. We are first of all kicking off with Interschutz, which takes place from next week, followed by the NFPA in Chicago. We will also be having a stand at the A+A show in Dusseldorf, and we do plan to have a personal safety event here in the UK. So there may be other information that we share with you, but that's just to give you a little idea of what we have planned for the time being.
Another things that we're possibly looking to be able to do is to be able to deliver some seminars locally on a global level. So we're getting in touch with our regional offices in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Taiwan, to deliver some of those in the autumn of this year, and then possibly trying to look over to get something organised for the United States, where we can sort of give face-to-face seminars over in North America in 2016. So the idea is that we can give you as much information face-to-face, and we're looking to sort of be able to come to customers and manufacturers globally, as well as just delivering webinars and UK-based events.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. So we have a dedicated web page. The URL is on the screen, and we have a location there where you can register for further updates. You can download our white paper, that's available today, and please do contact us if you have specific requirements. So hopefully you will join us on the next webinar around the categories. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Nathan. And we hope you will join us for the next webinar.